Now, just in time for Halloween, Burger King in the United States launching a limited edition burger bun featuring an unnatural colour. The brand went on to do an unusual experiment. It's called the Nightmare King, and here's how it played out.
Can a burger cause nightmares? That's what Burger King asked us when they came to us with this new burger. And we're here to see if it truly deserves to be called the Nightmare King. So from different studies in the past, we know that foods can affect dreams and sleep quality. And we're going to be looking at specific mixtures of proteins and see if that can actually disrupt a person's sleep and possibly induce a nightmare.
So basically what we're doing tonight is a polysomnography. We're going to be putting a couple of electrodes on your head, and we're going to check for electrical brain activity. We're going to make sure to see what type of stage of sleep you're in, and we're going to determine if you have nightmares or not. What do you see?
A green hamburger.
I see bacon, beef, chicken. I have to eat the whole thing.
You have to eat it all.
With this burger, the impact on sleep is going to be primarily based on all the different proteins in there.
You've got to do it all. Finish up, little man. Sweet dreams.
It wouldn't be out of this world to experience something vivid in their sleep. So right here you can see the subject's brain activity is picking up, and so is their heart rate, which may have displayed a nightmare.
Someone in my dream turned into the burger. The burger then transformed into the figure of a snake.
In the water, I was swimming, and I remember I saw like alien coming up from the water and was trying to attack this little boat I was on.
Our clinical study proves that the Nightmare King increases your chances of having nightmares by 3.5 times.
And on to a nightmare of a different kind now, the Trump presidency. A new book by veteran American investigative journalist Bob Woodward reveals the harrowing life inside Donald Trump's White House. With a career spanning 47 years, the Pulitzer Prize winner honed his reporting through 8 presidencies from Richard Nixon to Barack Obama. In the book entitled Fear, Trump in the White House, Woodward draws from hundreds of hours of interviews with first-hand sources to reveal the explosive debates that drive decision-making in the Oval Office. But here's the media angle to all of this. How did he go about doing it, and what impact has he had? Well, we tried to get hold of Bob Woodward. We're still trying, but in second place, Simon Marks, ENCA senior correspondent based in Washington and visiting us here in Johannesburg. If Bob Woodward were to show up, Simon, I'd ask you to vacate that chair.
Of course, I'm ready to leave at any point.
But for the uninitiated, put Bob Woodward into some sort of perspective for us and the exalted position that he holds in journalism.
So exalted is exactly the right word to use, Jeremy. He is unequalled in Washington, D.C. Remember that it was Woodward and Bernstein, these two cub reporters back in the 1970s at the Washington Post, who unravelled the Watergate scandal, unravelled the Nixon presidency that ultimately resulted in Richard Nixon having to resign the presidency and leave the White House. And since then, Bob Woodward has stayed with the Washington Post throughout his career, and he is the go-to guy in Washington, D.C. when it comes to writing the real first draft of history for each presidency. So every time Bob Woodward produces a tome like this, and he's produced one on every president from Richard Nixon onwards, you know, it arrives with a thud on doorsteps all over Washington, D.C., but that thud is weighted down by the fact that Bob Woodward is the most credible journalist in the city. And on this occasion, the most credible journalist in Washington, D.C. is writing about, in many ways, the least credible president of the United States.
Let's look at some of the media technique behind this. First of all, 100 hours of interviews. The trick, it seems to me, is his ability to get people to open up.
You or I or other journalists go off and we talk to sources all the time, and we talk to them often on background. That's when we will say to an interviewee, you can tell me anything you like, I'm not going to reveal that you are the person who said it during the course of the interview. I'll come up with a euphemism for describing you, a senior Trump administration official, a senior executive at ENCA, but I won't name you. Woodward takes the process one level further. He engages in something called deep background, where he says, you can tell me absolutely anything. I want to record your thoughts. I want to record your feelings as these episodes took place. And as you relate those to me, I am going to weave them together with other versions of the story that I have heard from other people, almost in a sort of novel fashion of writing. I mean, there is almost a sort of certain fictional tick to the way in which Bob Woodward threads all of this together. So you'll be reading sections of the book, as you have, Jeremy, and he'll be saying, you know, Reince Priebus, the former White House chief of staff, felt utterly perplexed when something happened. Well, how does he know he felt utterly perplexed? The reader is led to conclude that it's because Mr. Priebus told him that, or perhaps someone else in the room said, it looked to me like he felt utterly perplexed by what happened. It makes it very murky in terms of your ability always to unpick all of the things that he's relating, but it also makes it very compelling. It
also talks about fact-checking, which he is obsessive about. But it's difficult, surely, because everyone who has spoken to him here has obviously got an agenda.
Yes.
And that makes fact-checking perhaps a little bit more difficult, a little bit more opaque.
But in order to protect himself, he records all of these interviews. He's got presumably hundreds of hours of tape from these interviews.
Locked away, no doubt.
Locked away and ready to, at some point, be unleashed. And he gathers documentation too. So it's made it much harder for the Trump presidency, which, as everyone knows, is the presidency that invented the phrase alternative facts, to say this book, unlike some other books that have been written about the Trump presidency, Michael Wolff's book, for example, which they dismissed as utter fiction, a book designed simply to chip away at the credibility of the Trump presidency, making stuff up. It's much harder to say that about Bob Woodward. So, one example, he relates this extraordinary story where the chief economic advisor at the time, Gary Cohn, is so anxious that Donald Trump is about to sign a document that is on his desk that would undo the US-South Korea Free Trade Agreement, that when Trump's attention is diverted elsewhere, Gary Cohn filches the document, steals the document off the president's desk. Now, it seems pretty apparent that Gary Cohn himself was the source for that story. The White House can't dismiss it because Woodward's got the letter. He's actually got the document, and you can find it, you can see it.
It's, I mean, I don't want to use cliches in describing it. I mean, riveting doesn't even begin to describe it. It's obsessively compelling. You have all these revelations, but I can't help but wonder if it changes anything, particularly as far as the Trump White House is concerned. Doesn't that speak to the waning influence of media?
I'll tell you why I think this is an important book. This is the first book about Trump, or the first journalistic work about Trump, that actually demonstrates that there is at work inside the White House, as Woodward describes it, an administrative coup d'etat. The people who are on the payroll surrounding Donald Trump, but who privately told Bob Woodward they're trying to head off his worst excesses, they are trying to derail ideas. You live in Washington, you hear this stuff, you talk to people, you know it's happening.
But now it's on the record.
Woodward puts it on the record. And what happens a week later? There's an anonymously scribed opinion piece that appears in the New York Times, written by a senior administration official, as of yet unmasked, in which that senior administration official says, I am a member of the resistance, and the American public need to know there are people inside this government working to try and prevent some of the worst excesses that the president would like to see happening from actually taking place. That, by the way, raises massive questions about democracy. President Trump was elected. You may not like what he's doing, but he was elected to build that wall along the US border with Mexico, to wage a trade war with China.
What is the lesson from this book for reporters? What does Bob Woodward get right here?
Well, what Bob Woodward gets is time. I mean, that's the real lesson here. This is not someone who is writing daily articles for the Washington Post. This is not someone who's hosting a television show for multiple hours a day. This is someone who is given the time by his newspaper to go and dig and dig and dig and ferret and ferret and ferret and gather all of this string together until he's ready to sew the final tapestry. If you want to create work of long-lasting historic value, if you truly want to write the first draft of history, you've got to have time to put it together. And that, I think, is the ultimate lesson.
The book is called Fear Trump in the White House. Simon Marks, thank you very much indeed. You can weigh in on all of our stories today on our different social media platforms. And until next time, goodbye to you, and thank you for watching.